Earthling, your species managed to erase nearly 30% of its own economy in less than 4 years, and you called it the Great Depression. The curious part? You didn't need an alien invasion, a meteor, or an interdimensional rift. You did it all by yourselves, with numbers on paper and blind faith in endless growth. Most humans believe it started because of a simple stock market crash. One bad day on Wall Street, panic, and boom, chaos. Easy to blame the brokers, shouting prices, and the rich men in suits losing their fortunes overnight, right? But here's what confuses my extraterrestrial senses. How does an entire civilization collapse because some humans traded imaginary ownership of companies that didn't even produce anything new? How can belief, not bombs, destroy cities, families, and futures? The truth, Earthling, is far stranger. The 1929 crash was just the spark. The real fire came from what you built before the fall, a tower of greed, credit, and illusion so unstable it made your financial system behave like a black hole swallowing itself. In this report, we'll dissect the first global economic meltdown of the modern age, not as historians, but as cosmic investigators. Because to understand your present crises, we must return to the decade when humans believed prosperity could never end, until it did. It all began in the 1920s, a decade you humans still call the Roaring Twenties. If I were to describe it from my cosmic field notes, it felt like standing in the middle of a fireworks show that would never end. The world was recovering from the Great War, factories were roaring, radios were singing, and the belief that money could only go up was as contagious as a virus. I landed in New York City in 1927, disguised as an investment analyst. From the skyline itself looked like an act of defiance. Steel towers rising higher each month. Mirroring the optimism of the humans below, automobiles filled the streets, jazz echoed from every corner, and ordinary workers bragged about owning shares of companies they'd never even seen. Banks handed out loans as if the future was guaranteed, and no one questioned it, because questioning it meant you didn't believe in America. If optimism were a resource, this planet would have achieved infinite energy in 1928. There were the dreamers, entrepreneurs promising to change the world, the speculators, young clerks who thought they could get rich before turning 30, and the guardians of the system, the bankers and policymakers who, ironically, believed they had finally conquered economic instability forever. Humans had invented a machine that turned hope into numbers, and they called it the stock market. Cheap credit became the oxygen feeding this illusion. With new inventions like the automobile, the radio, and the refrigerator, people believed they were entering a new age of unstoppable progress. Stocks doubled, then tripled, and by 1929, even barbers and taxi drivers were giving investment advice. When everyone's a financial genius, Earthling, that's when the simulation is about to crash. A few humans, rare anomalies, warned that prices were rising faster than profits, that companies were borrowing to buy their own shares. But optimism drowned out logic. I still remember overhearing one banker laugh and say,
"The market will never go down again."
It was the kind of statement that made my internal sensors flag a critical anomaly. Earthling. Imagine a civilization that builds flying machines, discovers radio waves, and yet believes trees can grow to the sky. My sensors detected extreme levels of collective euphoria, beyond the limits of rational biology. Apparently, your species has evolved to ignore math when emotions are profitable. And so, by late 1929, humanity had built its greatest monument, not made of stone or steel, but of debt and illusion. I stood there, watching the skyscrapers gleam against the sunset, unaware that soon, those towers would cast shadows long enough to cover the entire planet. By 1929, I was no longer just observing, I was inside the system. Every human I met seemed to have discovered a universal truth. Money could multiply itself. Banks, brokers, and even shoeshine boys had joined a collective trance. And at the heart of it all was a new financial engine that humans called buying on margin. They believed they had unlocked a cosmic secret. You could buy $100 of stock with only $10 in real money. The other $90 borrowed. It was as if your species had discovered gravity and immediately tried to jump off a cliff just to test it. Earthling, imagine you're on my planet, Zorath 7. You buy a spaceship by paying for the steering wheel, borrow the rest, and then celebrate as if you already owned the galaxy. That was your stock market in 1929. Millions of humans buying dreams with debt, convinced they were geniuses because the numbers on paper kept going up.
You can't lose, Frank. The Dow's up again.
I just borrowed more to buy US steel. It's only going higher.
Fascinating. You're borrowing money to buy something that's already too expensive.
Exactly. That's how everyone's making money.
My translator nearly exploded trying to process that sentence. The logic was flawless, in the same way that jumping from a skyscraper feels like flying. For the first few seconds, as long as prices rose, everyone felt rich. When prices stopped rising, even for a moment, the illusion would evaporate faster than your stock certificates during a bank run. But humans don't like to look down when they're falling upward. Earthling, you must understand, it wasn't greed alone that powered this madness. It was faith. Faith that the world had changed forever. Your species worships optimism like it's oxygen. And optimism is dangerous when it starts charging interest. By the summer of 1929, the numbers no longer made sense. Corporations were worth more than entire nations. I remember standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the noise deafening, the smell of ink and sweat thick in the air. Everyone believed they were ascending toward infinite wealth, but from where I stood, slightly above human eye level, I could see the cracks forming beneath their feet, because when an illusion becomes a system, the system eventually breaks itself. It began with whispers. On the morning of October 24th, 1929, the New York Stock Exchange didn't sound like the temple of wealth I had known for months. It sounded nervous. I could feel it, even before the humans did. The air had changed. Traders rushed through the doors, their polished shoes tapping like a metronome of panic. For months, everyone had believed the market could only go one direction, up. But that morning, for the first time, no one wanted to buy. I stood on the balcony, blending in with the crowd of analysts. The ticker tape machines, those little mechanical beasts spitting out prices, were hours behind. The numbers they printed weren't real anymore. They were relics of a world that no longer existed. I saw faces twist from confusion to disbelief, disbelief to fear. The prices dropped, phones rang, and one by one, humans began to realize their fortune had been made of air.
Sell everything! Sell! There are no buyers left.
Wait, you're all trying to sell at the same time?
Of course, before it's too late.
A flawless strategy. Everyone leaving the spaceship mid-flight. What could possibly go wrong? It was chaos disguised as economics. By noon, the trading floor looked like a battlefield made of paper and desperation. The panic didn't stop that day. It grew, like gravity, pulling everything down faster. The following week, October 28th and 29th, became known as Black Monday and Black Tuesday. The Dow Jones collapsed. Millions of shares were dumped and billions of dollars vanished, not into fire or dust, but into thin, imaginary value that had only ever existed in human belief. And belief, Earthling, was now in short supply. Remember those brilliant humans buying stocks with borrowed money? Well, when the prices fell, their brokers demanded that money back. It was called a margin call, but no one had the cash, because that cash had never really existed. So to pay their debts, investors sold more stocks, which pushed prices down further, which triggered more margin calls. It was a perfect chain reaction of self-destruction, like watching humans pour gasoline on a fire to try to put it out. Within weeks, the disaster jumped from the towers of Manhattan to the streets of every small town in America. Banks began to fail. People rushed to withdraw their savings, forming lines that wrapped around blocks. When the money ran out, the doors stayed locked, and just like that, life savings turned to dust. I visited one of those banks, disguised again, as the panic spread.
Please, I just need what's left in my account.
I'm sorry, sir. The bank is closed.
Closed? But my money?
Wasn't really there. It was loaned out, multiplied, and lost. Fascinating system. The man didn't find it fascinating. He just looked down at his trembling hands. Factories shut down. Farms couldn't sell their crops. Families lost their homes. I walked through city streets once filled with jazz and light, now silent, except for the sound of soup being poured into tin bowls. Children stood in bread lines that stretched across entire blocks, their parents staring blankly into the fog of the Great Depression. Earthling, your cities had once glowed brighter than the stars. Now they were filled with people trying to sell apples just to survive. From my ship, orbiting above one evening, I recorded a message. Observation 47. Humans built an economy on optimism, borrowed hope, and infinite confidence. Then they discovered that optimism has an expiration date. The real tragedy wasn't just the money lost, it was the illusion that vanished with it. The same minds that once bragged about a new era of prosperity were now burning their financial statements for heat. And yet, amid the ruins, I noticed something else, the search for someone to blame. Bankers pointed at investors. Investors blamed the government. Politicians blamed the system. But I had a theory of my own. Perhaps, Earthling, it wasn't just greed or ignorance. Perhaps it was hope, your species' most dangerous addiction. The crash was over, but the silence that followed was worse. Wall Street looked like a crime scene, the kind where everyone swore they were just innocent bystanders. The newspapers demanded answers. Politicians shouted in Congress. The people wanted a name, a face. someone to blame for the disaster that had turned dreams into debts. And so began what you humans call the hunt for the guilty. I sat in the gallery of a congressional hearing in 1930, disguised once again, this time as a financial consultant from Ohio. One senator leaned across the table and thundered,
Who caused this catastrophe? Was it the speculators, the bankers, the brokers?
The room went silent. Of course, no one raised their hand. Humans are fascinating. They can lose billions collectively and somehow, individually, everyone's innocent. The first suspects were the bankers and stockbrokers. They had built the illusion, selling stocks on credit, hyping worthless companies, and lending to anyone with a pulse and a pen. When it all collapsed, some quietly vanished. Others showed up to court in fine suits, claiming they were victims of market conditions. You created the market conditions.
Excuse me?
Nothing, just observing an ecosystem eating its own creator. Few went to prison. Most paid fines smaller than the fortunes they had already hidden. Justice, it seemed, was also running on low liquidity. Next, the crowd turned its eyes to the US government. Why hadn't anyone stopped the madness? Why were banks allowed to gamble with people's savings like a casino with velvet chairs? The truth was simpler than any conspiracy theory. The government believed in the same illusion as everyone else. Regulation was seen as anti-business, and oversight as pessimism. So when the system fell, the watchmen were still asleep at their desks, dreaming of endless growth. But the cruelest twist of all, Earthling, was this. The guilty weren't just the rich. Ordinary people had joined the dance. Clerks, farmers, teachers, they had all jumped into the market, convinced they could double their savings overnight. Everyone believed they could outsmart everyone else. And that, perhaps, was the real culprit. Collective delusion disguised as opportunity. Tell me, Earthling, when everyone's getting rich, who dares to say the party's about to end? Still, in the ruins, a few humans decided to rebuild smarter. They created the Securities and Exchange Commission, a watchdog to keep Wall Street from repeating its own crimes. They passed new banking laws to separate savings from speculation. It was like patching a spaceship after it's already exploded, but at least they learned how to use the tools.
So, Mr. What did you call yourself again?
Just an observer.
Do you think they'll ever fix it?
Oh, they'll fix this version. Then they'll find a brand new way to break it again. The reporter laughed. I didn't. In the end, there were no real villains. Only flawed algorithms running inside human minds. Greed, fear, denial, and the eternal belief that, this time, it's different. The Great Depression wasn't just a financial collapse. It was a mirror. And when humanity looked into it, it saw what it didn't want to admit. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. By 1933, the noise was gone. The shouting of the traders, the clatter of the ticker machines, even the jazz that once filled the streets, all of it had been replaced by silence. It was the sound of a planet trying to understand what it had just done to itself. From my observation post, orbiting above a dimly lit New York City, I recorded a final entry in my field log. Subject: humanity. Condition: financially paralyzed. Diagnosis: terminal optimism. I had watched humans build entire empires on invisible numbers, then watched them crumble when those numbers stopped agreeing with their fantasies. You don't trade goods, Earthling. You trade belief. Every coin, every stock, every promise. It only exists because everyone agrees to pretend it does. And the moment that shared illusion breaks, so does everything built upon it. One night, I sat beside a bread line, where men in torn suits waited for soup. Their eyes were hollow, but their conversation wasn't about survival. It was about starting over.
When things pick up again, I'll buy back into General Electric.
Yeah, maybe I'll get back into real estate.
You lost everything, and you're already planning to do it again.
Well, that's what we do. Things always bounce back.
I wrote in my notebook, human resilience and human delusion share a frighteningly thin border. Earthling, I've analyzed your data across centuries, and you never truly learn from your financial mistakes. Each generation simply renames the illusion. You called it the stock boom in the 1920s, then the dot-com revolution in the 1990s, then crypto, real estate, meme stocks, different vocabulary, same circuitry. You don't just repeat history, you reinvest in it. The Great Depression wasn't just about money, it was about faith, the kind that makes humans believe they can rewrite the laws of mathematics through confidence alone. When you stripped away the skyscrapers, the ticker machines, and the headlines, what was left was a simple truth. Your species is both brilliant and blind. You create systems so complex that even you can't control them, then act surprised when they collapse. Imagine, Earthling, if I built a star reactor that could power an entire galaxy. Then I fed it more energy than it could handle because the glow looked beautiful. That's what your economy economy was, a machine that couldn't stop expanding without exploding. And instead of turning it off, you just stared into the light until it burned you. But here's the paradox that still fascinates me. You rebuilt. Against all odds, through dust storms, hunger, and despair, you found a way to start again. You created new systems, new jobs, new dreams. You even designed mechanisms to prevent the same disaster. They didn't work forever, of course, but still, impressive effort. That's what makes your species worth studying. Not your logic, that's clearly flawed, but your persistence. No matter how many times you crash the ship, you insist on fixing it and flying again. So, what did I learn from the Great Depression? That wealth isn't the opposite of poverty. Hope is, and hope is the most unstable currency in the universe. When humans lose it, they fall. When they regain it, they rebuild. And somewhere between the fall and the rebuild, that's where your true nature reveals itself. And so, Earthling, the investigation into your Great Depression concludes. Billions lost, lessons half learned, and hope somehow rebooted. You burned your own economy to the ground, then treated the ashes like fertile soil. Remarkable, illogical, beautifully human. I've archived this entire observation in my interstellar database under one title: The Day Humanity Bankrupted Itself and Kept Going Anyway. If you've reached this point of the transmission, congratulations, you've officially survived one of your species' darkest financial experiments. My analysis of human irrationality is far from over. There are countless other anomalies scattered across your economic history, each more baffling than the last. Activate the notification protocol, as you would say, because my next field report involves a financial black hole so massive it nearly consumed the entire planet. Again, we're jumping ahead almost 80 years to an era where humans believed they'd finally mastered money by turning debt itself into a product to be sold. Yes, Earthling. I'm referring to the 2008 financial crisis. A meltdown so strange it made 1929 look like a warm-up act. Subprime mortgages, collapsing giants, bailouts, and humans inventing something called a credit default swap, which, apparently, even your own economists couldn't fully explain. I'm still running simulations to understand it. None have survived past the third second. My surveillance of your financial behavior will continue. If you wish to receive the next transmission from orbit, initiate the subscription protocol and engage the notification beacon. The next anomaly, the Great Recession of 2008, is already under investigation. Until then, Earthling, keep your assets diversified, your optimism moderated, and your illusions, at least, interesting to watch. End of report. The Great Depression.